what I'm going to go over here today is really where I first learned how to quit, how to let something go. So remember, I'm never going to tell you to never give up on things. The question is what you have to analyze is, why is something meaningful to me? Because remember, that's the phrase that I use in the first principle, action over time. If it's worth having, if it's meaningful to you, then it is worth fighting for. It is worth continuing to press on. But this is not to be interpreted as never quit, because what if you realize one day that something isn't meaningful to you anymore? That job isn't meaningful to you anymore. This marriage staying in it isn't meaningful to you anymore, et cetera, et cetera. You have to determine that. Remember, this is taking responsibility for your beliefs, your actions, your direction in life. And so when this idea of story first became present to me when I graduated college. I graduated from the University of Houston in 2005 with a degree in electrical engineering, and I graduated with honors. I was a first generation college student, first in my family to ever finish college. And in particular, I finished college in 2005 and I got a job offer with Shell Oil Company there in Houston, Texas. And I started in August of 2005 working there. My starting salary was $60,000 a year. And if you can imagine being from an African American family from the Deep South, everybody, my family, my friends, everybody around me was so proud of me and thought I had really, really achieved the American dream. I was 23 years old at the time, and everybody just really was so proud of me and so happy for me. But I remember the feeling that I had when I graduated and when I was getting close to graduation was really it wasn't of celebration. It was more of relief. I was just relieved that college was over with. I worked really hard academically in school. Obviously, electrical engineering is a challenging degree pathway, but I think even more than the degree being challenging in and of itself, I think the reason I had to work so hard academically, and this just wasn't in college, this was also in high school, middle school as well. During my entire K through 12 education, not the whole time, but probably from about second or third grade on, I really applied myself aggressively academically. I would say I worked just as hard academically as I did on losing weight. And so I was really aggressive about academics all the way through graduating high school and then through graduating college. But the whole time I was never really that interested in anything that I was studying. And we'll get more into why I was pushing myself so hard. But all that to say, I was working so hard and I was just relieved that it was all over with once I got done with college. I was exhausted and I was so tired of force feeding myself information academically. But when I started working in August of was it August or it might have been July of 2005, one of the two. I still remember, and I write about this in my book, I still remember walking up to the Shell building in West Houston on the first day of work. And I remember thinking in my head very clearly, we'll never forget this, I am going to hate this. That is the phrase that kept running through my mind as I still remember sitting in that first meeting there that day and meeting everybody and just walking through the office and just thinking to myself, this is gonna drive me insane. I'm gonna hate this. And I was 100% right. Long story short, you have to buy the book to read the whole story. But eventually I end up, after about 8 or 9 months on a job, I started to have fantasies while I was driving to work. I lived more kind of towards the center of Houston, and I drove out to West Houston when it was time to go to work. And I started to have fantasies of driving off an overpass on the interstate when I would be driving to work. And I also eventually started having mild panic attacks every morning before work. On the weekend, they would go away when I was off. But when it was time to go to work, I would start having these panic attacks. And it was crazy to me because as sad as I had been growing up at different times when I was growing up as a kid, I never thought about taking my own life. And for the first time in my life, I was 23 years old, I was starting to contemplate taking my own life. And that was when I decided to go ahead and quit. When after about probably two to 4 weeks of just having these fantasies and having those panic attacks, I was like, man, I'm done with engineering. I'm through with this. This is making me miserable. And so I walked away. And I decided to try personal training right after quitting corporate America and quitting that job. But the problem is while I was at the job in that 11-month period that I worked as an engineer, I got a new car loan. Obviously, I had my student loan debt, and I had a couple other debts that I needed to pay off. And of course, jumping right into personal training, I couldn't match the income right away that I was gonna have, that I had as an engineer. There was no way I was gonna make $60,000 a year in, having started personal training 3 months, prior, or whatever the case may be. And so pretty quickly, I began to run into a lot of financial trouble. And eventually my car got repossessed. My credit cards went into default. My student loans went into deferment. And eventually I found myself being evicted from my apartment for failure to pay rent. And also the power had been turned off in my apartment because I hadn't paid the electricity bill either. And so eventually I'm still working. I was working at a 24-hour fitness that was nearby. And I would go to work during the day and then I would come home. This is probably a year or so after I had quit working for Shell as an engineer. And I would go to 24-hour fitness during the day. And then I would come home at night to this dark, empty apartment. And I would sit there and just kind of think about what had gotten me to that point. Because, a year prior, I was at the apex of what the American dream looked like. And I was the epitome of success to all the people around me. But now that I was being evicted and all this financial trouble and I was a personal trainer, during that time period, a lot of the people that felt that I had been so successful, I would say some of them scoffed at me, and we're talking about family, friends at the time. Some of them thought I was extremely foolish and stupid for making the decision to walk away from engineering. People felt like I wasn't paying my dues, and people just felt like, Travis, do you not understand how many people would be so grateful to have that engineering job that you had, et cetera, et cetera. People just felt like people could not fathom walking away from that kind of money after putting that kind of energy and effort into getting that degree and then allowing myself to tumble into this financial turmoil. But here's the irony. And look, I want to be very clear here. I'm probably like 24 at the time. I'm being evicted from this apartment, car repossessed. I'm like $60,000 in debt. I go from making $60,000 a year as an engineer to now I'm $60,000 in debt. And I have no job and like a trickle of an income as a personal trainer. Something has to happen, but I don't know what. But here's what was very interesting to me and what I began to contemplate in this dark apartment is I was actually happier during that time period. I'm walking to the gym every day. I'm broke as a joke. Like, I'm embarrassed when I see classmates from college out and about in town because I know I don't have any money and I know I've quote unquote fallen from grace because I quit this job. But man, like, I was happier. When I was depressed as an engineer, I gained like 30 to 40 pounds. Like I said, panic attacks every day. My knees and my back were starting to hurt every day. And of course, I'm starting to have these fantasies of taking my own life. But once I cut loose from that environment and went into that gym environment as a personal trainer, the weight melted off. My body started to feel good again. I could sleep at night. I was having insomnia when I was an engineer. I could sleep at night again. Like, the depression was, the difference in mood was so incredibly stark to me. This is what was so profound to me because I was like, man, I'm infinitely happier working at a gym with way less money. I have hardly any material possessions. I'm getting calls from creditors every day. Like, there's a stressful component during this time, but I recognize that in terms of my resilience to get up every day and do the work to be a personal trainer, like, I could see myself doing that in the long term. Now, financially, I couldn't sustain it because of the debt and the indebtedness that I was in. And so what I found myself thinking about was, you know, when yeah, so let me say it like this. What I found myself thinking about while I was in that apartment was the irony of, here I am flat broke, being evicted, and I'm in all this debt, but I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life, versus when I was an engineer and at the epitome of success and making 60 grand a year, I was like so miserable that I was thinking about taking my own life, or daydreaming about taking my own life. I never really got serious about it, but to have daydreams about it is pretty damn serious in my opinion. And I was trying to figure out, like, how did I go to this, from this apex of success where everybody's celebrating me, to now everybody thinks I'm a fool, thinks I'm lazy, et cetera, et cetera. And I have no money and I'm being evicted and I can't pay my bills, but I'm happy. Like, it was such a weird dichotomy. And what the other thing that made it challenging for me was when I would talk to family and friends after, now that I'm being evicted, I'm struggling financially. When I would talk to people close to me and talk through the reality of my situation, I would get a lot of, like, I told you so. I told you were stupid. I told you were foolish for leaving that engineering job. I told you were making the worst mistake of my life. And so eventually what I had to do was I began to stop calling people, and I began to isolate myself from friends and family, because I needed the space to not have my emotions manipulated by the situation and people's sort of insistence that the high income, good job, corporate America version of me was actually not only the better version, but the only version that they were willing to allow to exist. And so now that I'm trying to move in a different direction with my life as a personal trainer, fitness guy, whatever, people are using my financial situation to beat me over the head and belittle me. Sometimes it felt like being a little kid again and getting bullied again. So eventually I stopped answering the phone. I stopped calling people on my cell phone, even my parents to some extent. And what I began to do is I would come home from the gym, especially once the power got cut off in the apartment. And I would sit in that dark apartment and I would just think. And I would at the time I was a religious person. I would pray, but mainly I would think, and I had a notepad where I would write things down and try to figure out, like, how did I get in this position?